In 2021, Saudi Arabia promised the world a miracle in the desert, a single mirrored skyscraper 500 meters tall, stretching an impossible 170 kilometers across the sand. They call it the Line, a 500 billion utopian city with no cars, no roads, and housing for 9 million people. It was designed to be the ultimate technological marvel, the crown jewel of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's plan to completely reinvent the nation's oil-based economy. But cut to 2026, and that grand vision has violently collided with the law of physics and supply chain economics. The 170-kilometer megacity is collapsing into a hyphen. According to leaked internal audits, the true projected cost to finish the project exploded to a staggering $8.8 trillion. By late 2025, the financial and physical realities become too massive to ignore, and construction on the main structure was abruptly suspended. Now, the ambitious 2030 goal has been quietly slashed by over 98%. Instead of a sprawling 170-kilometer metropolis spanning the country, developers are scrambling to finish just a tiny 2.4 kilometers fragment. The expected population has plummeted from millions down to fewer than 300,000. How did the most expensive construction project in human history fall apart so quickly? And what happens when a trillion-dollar dream meets the unforgiving reality of global supply chains and sovereign wealth limits? To understand why the line exists, we first have to understand the fear that drives Saudi Arabia. For decades, the country has been incredibly wealthy. This wealth comes from one main thing: oil under the ground. But the world is changing. Cars are turning electric. Countries are trying to use solar and wind power. The Saudi royal family knows that the age of oil will eventually come to an end. If they do not find a new way to make money, their massive economy will face deep trouble. In 2016, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman announced a massive plan called Vision 2030. The goal was simple but very hard. Saudi Arabia must build a post-oil economy. They needed to make money from technology, from global tourism, and from real estate. But how do you convince the world's biggest tech companies and richest investors to move to a hot desert? You have to build something so amazing, so futuristic that they simply cannot ignore. That is how the mega development NEOM was born. NEOM is a giant piece of land near the Red Sea, roughly the size of the entire country of Belgium. The line was meant to be the shining crown jewel of NEOM. It was not just a city. It was a giant marketing campaign to attract foreign investment. It was designed to tell the world to bring their money here. But drawing a beautiful picture on a computer is very different from building it in the real world. When engineers looked closely at the plan for the line, they saw a nightmare of logistics. The line is supposed to be two parallel buildings, 500 meters tall, running for 170 kilometers. To build something that massive, you need an amount of steel, concrete, and glass that is almost impossible to imagine. Some experts point out that building the line would require a huge percentage of the world's total glass and steel production. You cannot just order that much material on the internet. You have to physically move it. You would need thousands of massive trucks driving into the empty desert every single day for years. You would need to build giant factories right next to the desert just to mix the concrete. Then there is the pure physics problem. The Earth is round. Over a distance of 170 kilometers, the Earth actually curves. You cannot build a perfectly straight flat building for 170 kilometers without dealing with the fact that the ground drops away underneath it. And then there is the heat. The line is meant to be covered in mirrors. If you put two giant 500-meter tall mirrors in the burning sun, they reflect heat. The amount of electricity needed to run air conditioners to keep the city cool would be astronomical. The planners promised it would be easy and green. But the real-world challenge of moving the rocks, pulling the concrete, and fighting the desert sun proved to be an impossible puzzle. Even with unlimited money, the global supply chain simply cannot move fast enough to build a 170-kilometer skyscraper in 1 decade. This brings us to the biggest problem of all, the money. When Saudi Arabia announced the line, they said it would cost about $500 billion. That is a lot of money, but for a rich country, it sounds possible. However, the real plan was that Saudi Arabia would only pay for part of it. They wanted foreign investors like big banks in America and Europe and global tech companies to pay for the rest. But the smart money stayed away. Institutional investors hate taking big risks. Building a completely new type of city with no proven history in the middle of a desert was way too risky. If one part of a 170-kilometer linear city fails, the whole thing could break down. Without foreign money pouring in, the Saudi government had to start paying for almost everything out of their own pocket. But the price was going up fast. As they started digging the giant trenches in the sand, they realized the original $500 billion budget was completely wrong. In 2025, an internal audit inside the mega project found massive problems. Reports showed that the true cost to finish the whole 170-kilometer project could explode to an unbelievable $8.8 trillion. To put that in simple terms, $8.8 trillion is a financial black hole. At the same time, the price of oil, which Saudi Arabia still relies on, was fluctuating. The country was facing lower than expected investments and widening budget deficits. The Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund had to admit they could not afford the dream. Because of these crushing physical and financial realities, the government was forced to make a drastic choice. They had to wake up from the dream. In 2024 and confirmed by early 2026, the quiet pivot began. Planners decided that by the deadline of 2030, they would not build 170 kilometers. They would only aim for 2.4 kilometers. That is less than 2 miles. Instead of 9 million people, or even the 1.5 million they later promised for 2030, the new goal is fewer than 300,000 residents. Construction on the main project was even halted as they tried to figure out what to do next. This is a 98% reduction in the size of the original 2030 plan. The line is no longer a massive ribbon stretching across the entire country. It is now basically just a very large, expensive building on the coast. So, what happens now? Is the line completely dead? Saudi Arabia is not stopping construction entirely, but they are stopping the science fiction fantasy. They are moving their money away from the impossible mirrors and towards things that actually make a profit. Instead of a giant city for millions of regular people, the small 2.4-kilometer section of the line is being repurposed. Saudi Arabia is focusing on building things that the modern world actually buys: AI data centers and digital infrastructure. By keeping the project small and near the coast, they can use the cold salt water from the ocean to help cool down massive computer servers. They are also spending billions on a normal industrial port called Oregon, which will help ships trade goods. This is not as exciting as a shiny mirror city, but it makes real money. The story of the line is the ultimate lesson in reality. In the end, Saudi Arabia wanted to build a miracle in the desert to save the economy, but they learned the hard way that gravity, logistics, and money always win. Thank you for watching.